Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nationalist Radio America for the week of November 13th, 2017. Sorry about taking so long to get this one out. I got a bit of a cold, and I wanted this video to be just right because I think it's that important. If you're a Republican or value the ideas that this country was founded on, you should start caring about race and the demographics of your country. And I'm going to spell out in this video exactly why. It's not racist to talk about it. It is practical, and it is important. But first, I want you to ask yourself a question. Pause the video if you have to. Before I even begin, what would the United States look like without Republicans? Not just current day, but also in history. What would the country look like? What would the economy look like? What would colleges look like? What would the government look like? What would the social welfare programs we have in place, how much larger would they be if Republicans didn't exist? What would the world look like with the population in America that is only 38% right-wing? What would the new Republican Party and the new right-wing become? So in this video, I'm going to touch a lot, and in fact, almost exclusively on hard data. And I know that statistics aren't very interesting, but it's imperative that people understand the crisis of the demographic winter that we have on our hands and just what that means. These trends have been continuing for at least 50 years, and they're not showing any signs of stopping. It is as much a demographic crisis as it is a values crisis. People bring their culture with them. This isn't just a matter of brown people coming in or black people coming in or yellow or purple or pink or whatever. People bring their values with them, and they will vote in accordance with those values, and the country will change permanently as a result. Before I begin, officially, I want you to take a look at a few graphics. We're going to start here, and we're going to end here. For one, even Pew recognizes the large disparity amongst the ethnicities when it comes to party identification. This isn't some arcane, esoteric knowledge found in the deepest corners of the web on neo-Nazi websites. It's right here in black and white, straight from Pew. Second, as we touched on in the last video, all projections at this time show whites becoming a minority in their own country by no later than 2042, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, and Pew for that matter. At a national level, from 1960 to 2017, whites went from 88.6% of the population to only 61%, due largely, if not exclusively, to the Hart-Celler Act. And that's just legal citizens. If you factor in illegals, whites are only 56% of the population today. That is a 27.6% reduction in only 47 years, or an average displacement of 5.8% per decade, or about 0.6% per year, give or take. Hispanics in the same time frame went from 4.5% to 16.5% of the population, not including illegal immigrants, and are largely responsible for the demographic displacement of Americans. The white population, as a percentage, is expected to decline in America another at least 16% in the next 30 years, making America no longer a European country and becoming a majority non-white country. Think about that for a minute, and let's examine what that means. Let's begin by looking at the United States in its current form. Today, there are about 320,372,000 people in the United States. I've seen numbers that go up to like 321 million, but the numbers I look at from numerous sources all say roughly in between like 320 to 321 million. So I think 320.5 is a pretty good number to roll with. So, certainly for the purposes of the video, it's just fine. Of those, 61% or 195.5 million are white, 12% or 39.2 million are black, 18% or 57.6 million are Hispanic, 6% or 18.3 million are Asian, and about 3.75 or 9.6 million are other, to include American Indians, Hawaiian, and mixed race. Fair enough, right? I mean, whether or not you agree that, America should be more or less diverse, that is the reality of where we're at today, at least that we know of, not factoring in illegal immigrants, etc. As we talked about in my last video, the votes of the different ethnic groups have been trending a particular way for about the last 50 to 60 years, and they show absolutely no signs of changing anytime soon. There's not an upward or downward trend either way, and voting patterns seem to be pretty well set in stone, give or take like a % here or there. And this is represented amongst the different groups, except whites, who seem to pretty steadily remain at roughly like a 50-50 spread, but have become closer to like a 60-40 spread when a candidate is particularly strong on either side. But really the best you get is about 60-40. So let's look at the breakdown of votes amongst the ethnicities and how that factors into the elections. Specifically, we're talking about elections right now. And what I'm using for information is what I'm using is the 2012 election here for the voting turnout, and I'm using the latest, I mean seriously, truly the latest population estimates that I could find. So I'm also using a 100% voter turnout. So this is how these numbers are arrived at. Assuming a 100% voter turnout, using voting trends and percentages gathered from the last 60 years. So I'm not just saying, oh, well, let's only look at 2012. These trends are consistent. I arrived at a pretty rough estimate of what I believe to be a reasonable, realistic expectation of party affiliation amongst the different ethnicities. Using this, and again, assuming 100% voter turnout, with current demographics, the current population of Republicans in the United States is 143.6 million, and the current population of Democrats is 163.3 million, represented in this pie chart. That's roughly equal, and actually about what you would expect to see even in a homogeneous group. Given the low turnout of non-white ethnic groups, you can expect to see a swing left or right in the election cycle, depending on how strong a candidate is on either side. So if you have a really crappy candidate like John McCain, you can expect a lot of Republicans aren't going to support him, but overwhelmingly the people that vote Republican are still going to be the same regardless. But you do see a larger shift from the small independent voters to the stronger candidate. Either way, regardless of their personal views and stances, they say, well, this other candidate is just a really crappy candidate. So let's look at how the parties, specifically the two parties, Democrat and Republican, break down by ethnicity. I represented this in a couple of different charts because I think it's that important. As you can see here, whites make up the vast majority of the Republican vote and a large portion of the Democratic vote, no doubt due to being 61% of the population. But there's an interesting difference between the two parties. Do you see it? The Democratic Party, as of 2017, is actually more non-white than white. The Republican Party is still white by a large margin, and whites actually make up just over 80% of the Republican vote. Now, let's look at one more graph to show another interesting phenomenon with this data. We're going to look at the different party affiliations as a group total of the population. That is, assuming 100% voter turnout, given the past 60 years of the trend, what percentage of the total population are Black Republicans, for example? Well, come find out, the numbers actually speak for themselves. As represented here, white Republicans are a grand total of 35% of the population, making up actually the largest group, followed by white Democrats making up 25% of the population. Next in line is Hispanic Democrats at 12.7%, Black Democrats at 11.5%, then Hispanic Republicans at 4.8%, Asian Democrats at 4.2%, other Republicans, again that's American Indians, Hawaiians, and mixed, at 1.7%, Asian Republicans at 1.4%, other Democrats at 1.2%, and in last place is Black Republicans at 0.7%. So, I mean, that's nice to look at, but how can we interpret that? Well, for starters, it means that if you are on the right wing and you are not white, you are exceedingly rare. So rare, in fact, that you are more likely to have asthma and or dementia than to vote Republican as a non-white. 10.5 million men have color blindness, and 8.7 million people are bound to wheelchairs or rely on a walker, cane, or crutches to ambulate. Meaning that if we took just the people who were colorblind, just men who were colorblind, and bound to wheelchairs or crutches, made them Republicans, you just made up 70% of the non-white Republican vote. It really puts it into perspective, I think. So, I mean, no, there aren't like a lot of them at all. It's time we start saying that. You, if you are a non-white on the right wing, you are the biggest minority of the minority. I mean, there are literally more black asthmatics bound to wheelchairs than there are right-wing blacks by orders of magnitude. Now, non-white Democratic voters are 29.6% of the population, Republican non-whites being only 8.6%. So basically round up, let's just say 30% to 9%. So literally almost 1/3 of the entire US population, and outnumbering white Democrats who make up only 25% of the total population. So is it any wonder why Democrats push so hard for immigration? I mean, they're guaranteed to get votes. Look at California. Look at Texas. Texas, which was a historically very red state, is now becoming more and more and more blue. And there are many projections that I'd love to link, but I can't get them working. I'll try to find a way, but there are projections that show, after a certain date, whites are going to be a vast minority in Texas, and it will be forever blue. So onto the meaty bits here. Let's fast forward. Let's use the internet to time travel here and go forward just a few decades. Every projection, as I said before, shows that Americans are being displaced nationally, primarily by Hispanics, but also by imported sub-Saharan Africans, for example, and Middle Easterners as part of the refugee crisis, etc. The Hispanic population is expected to triple in the next 33 years, actually more than triple, according to Pew, and Hispanics will make up, according to their studies, just under 30% of the population. The current projections 33 years from now in 2050 are that the US population will be somewhere near 438 million people. So of the US population in 2050, the first decade in which whites will be a minority in their own country, only 47% of the country will be white, 13% will be black, 29% will be Hispanic, and 9% will be Asian. 82% of that growth in that time frame, in those 33 years, will be immigrants and their descendants. So why is this a problem? Because assuming current trends continue to hold, and again, as yet for 50 years, at least 50 years, they show absolutely no sign of slowing or even changing. This puts right-wingers in a very, very precarious situation indeed. Why? Because non-whites overwhelmingly vote Democratic. And this means that the population of Republicans will grow only 20 million people in 33 years, while Democrat voters will grow around 100 million. I mean, look, here's a neat bar graph I made showing the difference. Now, I feel like already in this video, if not, using the previous video, my last video, as something to fall back on, I feel like I've sufficiently proven that Republican values are largely, if not exclusively, a white European trend. So I don't want to continue to harp on that point too much. That's not what this video is necessarily about. I want to acknowledge also that I know that not all races contribute equally to an election. So the average voter turnout is 60%, and I know for a fact, for example, like blacks only turn out in it's like 30% or something. So I understand that, and I know that. But seeing these numbers and assuming the average voter turnout of about 60%, I want to point something pretty scary out. If we take the numbers that we have here and reduce each by 40%, do you notice something? Literally 38% of Democrat voters in 2050 could sit at home and Democrats would still win nationwide, even with a 100% Republican turnout. Only if 40% of Democrat voters sat at home and 100% of Republicans went out and voted would Republicans win an election again. Now, the trend actually starts even earlier, when Republicans absolutely must turn out in droves in order to win again. And it starts actually like 10 years to 20 years from now, in the 2020s and 2030s. If I broke this down by ethnicity and just used, say, like whites at 60%, everyone else at 100%, you would see the trend start way earlier than even that. As white Republicans are, rapidly overshadowed by the overwhelmingly democratic Hispanic vote. I would like to make some prescient comment or make some keen observation as a message to leave with you all here. But I think the numbers speak for themselves. If we don't change our course immediately, the right wing as we know it in America is dead in the water in the next decade. Republicans, aka whites, right, 80% white, are losing 0.6% of their population representation every single year. Almost 6% on a national level every decade. Why are we acting like this is okay? Just look at this shit. Do you notice anything? Do you notice how we're taking 5 times more Hispanics than any other nationality? Do you think that's a coincidence? This has been happening since 1965, people. And where are Europeans on this? Oh, wait. Here they are, completely obscured behind sub-Saharan Africans. This country is never going to be the same again. Things must change. Building a wall is not enough. If you support the right wing, you must, by extension, support keeping America majority white. Period.